This is your Chargers linebacker, Deion Henley, and you're tuning in with Chargers Unleashed.
Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LA Football Network. If this is your first time tuning in the show, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Dan Wolkenstein, we are live. It's always fun doing the live shows. A little bit early on a Tuesday night. If you guys are joining us, obviously welcome to the chat. Excited to get into your guys' Q&A. If you guys are just driving home at the moment, happy to have you tune in, obviously. It's going to be a fun episode as we have lots to cover. I know Dan and I have not covered the first preseason game, as such things in life, tend to get in the way of scheduling. Things happen, but we got a lot to go over as it relates to the first preseason game. Obviously, a couple of practices that have taken place since then. Get the takeaways from those as well. But we always live shows. This is the atmosphere that we yearn for as it relates to talking Chargers banter with all of you. So if you guys have any questions, please pop them into the chat. We'll do our best, obviously, in this period of time to get them answered for you. Dan Wolkenstein, how are you, sir?
Boy, life comes at you fast. It has been quite the last few days, I would say a week or so in my household and as for yours. But I'm good, man. It's lots of news happening, a bunch of transactions with the Chargers. We saw a preseason game, real football happened. We got to see this first look at Jesse Minter defense, Greg Roman offense, and, what life would be like in a post-Justin Herbert era, which I don't think anyone wants to see that ever again. We'll talk about that and a lot more. Fun things on the horizon as well for Chargers fans, so stay tuned for what's in store next episode. Wink, wink. But I'm good. I think I'm ready to get into it. Jake, what did you what did you think about the Chargers preseason game number 1 under Jim Harbaugh? How did it look?
Well, if any of us were tuning into that game hoping to look for offense, you were probably a Seattle Seahawks fan because on the opposite side of the ball, the offense just was seemingly non-existent for 4 quarters of football for the Chargers. It was an ugly situation as it relates to the quarterback play. The offensive struggles in general, outside of just the quarterback play, problems along the offensive line, just wasn't able to get into a rhythm, couldn't get the run game established. Plenty of problems offensively. Defensively was a different story. Defensively, I loved some of the standouts that we're going to talk about here for the first preseason game. Defensively, I loved what Jesse Minter brought to the table with some of the creative ways that he was bringing guys off the edge, bringing blitz packages.
Yeah.
I loved how the linebackers played in this particular game, which is something that the Chargers have struggled with since the days of Drew Tranquill and Kaiser White being on this team at the same time. So it was good to see some of these improvements, especially defensively. And Dan, that's been kind of the biggest story as it relates to training camp, because how many times have we seen the reports come out now that, defense won the day. Defense won the day again. And seemingly that's what has been happening since Justin Herbert has been temporarily put on the shelf and not been able to practice. It's just been this reoccurring theme, but it's something that you love to see from a defense that has had the stats that they have had over the past couple of years under the Brandon Staley area. This is what you like to see. And certain guys that maybe we weren't expecting to be making a name for themselves over these past couple of weeks, that obviously puts a smile on your face, because depth has been another issue with this team. And from the bottom of the roster, one of the biggest goals from Joe Hortiz that he has talked about since he became the general manager of this team, building out the bottom of the roster, never being satisfied with it, essentially still looking for ways to improve. I think that's what you have seen over these past couple of weeks with training camp, and obviously now getting to play real football, as you said. Put a helmet into someone else's jersey. Defensively, I thought it looked good. Offensively, you got a lot to work on.
Yeah, we'll get to that. The shining stars and the darkest stars, I guess, if you will. The defense got me excited for the potential. And again, this is a preseason game, and usually it's pretty vanilla both sides of the ball. And if this is preseason vanilla Jesse Minter with these disguised blitzes, and you're seeing nickel blitzes and linebackers going in, like, this is going to be fun. This is going to be fun. We heard a lot of people talk about this new Jesse Minter defense and how maniacal he is. He's a madman, according to Brett Coleman, who had on the show earlier. The defense is fun. And to your point about the linebackers, it is nice to see this team with an emphasis on the linebacker group. 1, 2, have the linebackers actually show up and impact the game in a meaningful way. We saw that multiple times. Troy Dye, Nick Neiman. There's a bunch of dudes that were contributing, and that's exciting. On offense, you mentioned it. There's a comment here, and that's kind of how I felt. And I'll see if I can pull this up. But Richard Vargas, again, if you guys have comments, questions, put it in here. We'll talk about it. He says, just a wasted opportunity to see the receiving core get some work. And Jake, you and I have been at training camp multiple times this year. I was there the first day. Easton Stick was there, QB1, since Justin Herbert was injured. And it just looks different. The story reads different, and it's just a different offense. And that being said, it shouldn't look that bad. And maybe it was a bad day in the office for Easton Stick. I think Easton Stick looked better than that at times over the last few games in the last end of last season. But he kind of looked lost, and I saw no confidence. I saw no accuracy. I saw no command. And the offense went nowhere. And to Richard's point, Jake, the unfortunate part is there's guys hunting for roster spots and livelihoods on the line. And these receivers didn't really get a chance to show anything other than running in space without a ball going to them. That said, there were some bright spots. I thought Brendan Rice looked good. I thought Patterson looked good. Exciting to see Joe Alt in pads and hold his own. I thought he looked really good, all things considered. New position, first game, all that jazz. The backups on the offensive line, I think, were a little suspect, if you will. Didn't really give Easton Stick many favors, but they couldn't run the ball. They couldn't pass it. Protection wasn't great. And that made for an ugly afternoon on offense. Jake, I think we'll get into kind of the stars of the game. We'll get into kind of the major, I guess, takeaways on both sides of the ball. But before we do that, got to pay the bills.
Always.
Friends over at Bet Online.
Bet Online is the world's most talented betting platform and your number one source for everything online sports betting. Right now, you can receive a 50% free bet for up to $250 on your first deposit to bet on anything from the UFC to baseball to Formula One racing. Bet Online has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game is over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of our 150 slot games. Head on over to the website today. That's betonline.ag to get in on the action. Just make sure you use the promo code BELIEVE. That's BLEAV to get your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit up to $250. Bet Online. The game starts here.
All right, so let's get into it. Let's start with some fan questions to start this thing off. So let's get into some of these. Let's go first one. Let's see. If the Chargers picking 32nd next year, would you prioritize drafting the best center and draft Parker Brailsforth of Alabama, Washington? Chargers win Super Bowl, hoisted Lombardi. I see that slip there. What position are you focusing on other than the fact that we're at Disneyland just chugging beers?
First of all, let me applaud this question. Number one, for just shooting the moon, calling your shot. Chargers are going to win the Super Bowl in 2025, technically, but for the 2024 season. And on top of that, you're tickling my itch by also talking about the NFL draft in 2025, which just so happens to fall on this old man's 40th birthday. So, and you're talking about draft priorities. Like, look at this, Dan. We're in the middle of August, and someone is trying to get to me by instilling some draft talk in the middle of August.
It worked.
Gotta love this question. It's a little bit too early to say in terms of how high you would prioritize on certain positions. I'll give you this much. you're probably in a position to where you might be wanting to look at the DBs for next year again. You might be in a position where you need to be looking at wide receivers again. Center is definitely one. And if we know anything about what Jim Harbaugh and Joe Hortiz have proven, you build through the trenches. So I wouldn't put that idea past anybody, but good on you for calling the shot to the moon for the Chargers are going to be Super Bowl champions this season.
Yeah, that tight end, though, might also be one, the familiar one from Michigan. Might be a guy to look at, too. Although he probably won't be there at 32. But before we get to some preseason standouts, Young West asks, how do you guys think Harbaugh evaluates a loss like that, even if it's just preseason? Do you think he brushes it off or lights a fire? Jake, I really appreciated the immediate post-game press conference and then the following press conference from Jim Harbaugh, basically acknowledging the facts.
No sugarcoating.
No. I love the fact that he called out the defense and special teams playing well, and the offense left some to be desired. And then followed that up with the following day, I believe, when he's talking about, all those folks that say it's a marathon, not a sprint, they're wrong, and kind of lighting a fire about people playing for their jobs right now. And you see the corresponding moves. You're seeing quarterbacks getting waived. You're seeing another guys getting brought in. You're seeing linebackers brought in. You're seeing Ben Mason taken out. Like, this coaching staff and management is not afraid to tell it like it is. And we've said this since Harbaugh has been here and Hortiz and company. This staff has yet to pull the wool over our eyes and has yet to say something that they don't actually believe or execute upon. And so far, I don't think, they put it in perspective, right? It's preseason. The goal is to be healthy by week 1, but the goal also is to instill the things that they've taught in our learning. So I think the idea that he just brushes it off, no.
No. I thought that was evident from his press conference. No sugarcoating at all. Told it like it is. Said that the offense was below average as a whole, not just the quarterback play. There were plenty of things that went wrong with the offense on Saturday's preseason game. And to your point, Dan, they're not messing around by still living up to their word in terms of what they're doing in training camp. You're still seeing moving pieces, guys being signed. They're already waiving some other players. You mentioned Ben Mason. We were wondering who was going to be the fullback for this team. Does that mean that it's securely now Jordan McFadden's job to lose? In which case, a hell of a lot of position flexibility all of a sudden you have for a 303-pound offensive lineman essentially being your fullback. I'm waiting for the pancakes from Jordan McFadden if that indeed is the plan.
Yeah. Jordan McFadden is such a fun and unexpected storyline of this training camp and offseason so far. So it's cool seeing that number move in the positions that they're at. I think Jim Harbaugh, I actually commend him for the way that he talked about it honestly and didn't really sugarcoat it, like you mentioned earlier. To your point, though, like, there's the offensive line, like, people in the chat, I think a lot of people are talking about Brendan Hymas. Not a good day in the office for Brendan Hymas.
Leatherwood, definitely not a good day in the office.
Oof, yeah. If that was not something to put on your resume, but unfortunately, that's kind of been his resume. And you like to think that your coaching staff can fix anything. That didn't look like it was fixed, but it's only so much you can do. But I do think that it was the part that I wasn't ready for was seeing QB4 ball out a little bit. As much as we were kind of down on what Easton Stick did and the offense installing, and they get no first downs for like 5-6 straight series, in comes Perez, a guy who came in like 4 days prior, and he was like the most adequate, prepared, functional quarterback that day. And then now, fast forward, he's like taking press conferences. I mean, what's happening? So I'll ask you, Jake, what'd you make of the performance? A, And then B, what did you make of the fact that he's now doing press conferences? What message is that sending?
I was wondering the exact same thing, Dan. Put it into context of what was the message when Ben Herbert took the podium? When have you ever seen a strength and conditioning coach take the podium if there was not a point, if there wasn't a message to be sent? And you have a guy now who's quarterback 4 who looked the most confident in terms of pushing the ball down the field at the tail end of the preseason game last week. And now you have him right after that doing a press conference just days after. I think that's fantastic. I think it's sending the right message to the QBs ahead of him to say, look, overall, in terms of the 3 that played that game, we felt that he looked the best. So give him some time to talk about it. Get him some time to get up there. I thought it was not necessarily in the way of play, Dan, and definitely not in the same scope as far as the aura, but it's like, remember when Tim Tebow was signed by the Patriots and all of a sudden he had a press conference and essentially he was quarterback 3? It was like all of a sudden, like what was the message being sent and why was the media so covering it so much? I felt it was a little bit similar with Perez, just in the terms of, but I felt like this one was pushed a little bit more by the Chargers and by Jim Harbaugh. I thought there was definitely some subliminal messages to be sent in there. So good on Perez, not only for the play that he brought up, that he was able to put forth in a limited capacity in the preseason game, but good on him and the team for giving him this moment. I loved it.
It's pretty sad, Jake, when 5 for 12 for 61 yards and a 58 quarterback rating is the highlight of the quarterback room. But again, all things considered, he looked the most NFL game ready and able to move the offense. I'll take that. James Wagner, friend of the show, thank you for joining. My favorite comment of Harbaugh was defining the best player and encouraging the media that they can see who is playing the best. Those are your best players. I thought it was kind of funny the way he was kind of answering that. Like, you guys are smart, football. I wasn't sure if he was being ironic or if he was being, that was like in jest. But like, that being said, there's truth to it though. Like you can tell the guys, you're like, oh, that's not a starting caliber performance. And again, are we like for Luis Perez, like, are we expecting him to be the starter? Like, of course not. But I think what is important, and we'll talk about this with Easton Stick, is, Jake, when the whole Justin Herbert injury happened, that day, you and I talked about, like, okay, does this change who QB2 should be? And I said to you, like, I don't necessarily think that QB2, I don't think the responsible QB2 is currently on the roster. And you kind of retorted back and you're like, well, maybe, but at the same time, this offense should be kind of like tailor built for Easton Stick style of offense type of player, right? And then just to see what that looked like. And again, maybe it was just a bad day. I don't know, but that certainly was not good enough. And what compounds the issue is it's not just that's a backup quarterback. Backup quarterbacks aren't going to be as good as Justin Herbert. Like, that's true. But that was a bad backup quarterback performance, let alone one that's been with this team for now 5 years. Like, that's unacceptable. And you're seeing backup quarterbacks across the NFL who are slinging it. I mean, look, Sam Howell looked pretty good, all things considered. PJ Walker looked pretty good in comparison. Go around the league. Ryan Tannehill is still available. Like, there's guys that are there, and you just compare apples to apples. It was just unfortunate, and it was disappointing that Easton Stick and all the offense just looked that poor. Do you think that Easton Stick remains QB2? Or I should, maybe a better way of asking that is, like, how important is the second game?
Extremely. Again, if you take Harbaugh and Joe Hortiz at their word, which thus far, through the months of them being with this organization, I think that they've lived up to pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
So if you take them at their word and what they mean, and especially when Harbaugh sends a message of competitors welcomed, this isn't the Brandon Staley, Tom Telesco regime. This isn't the Tom Telesco, Anthony Lynn regime. Not Tom Telesco, any coach regime previous to the past 10 years. So familiarity, in my opinion, and relationship building is kind of out the window in this circumstance. Harbaugh is all about guys who are going to come in and make this team better. And what we know from Joe Hortiz, I mean, remember, just days ago, there was essentially 5 quarterbacks on the roster. One quarterback didn't even get a chance to play in this preseason game and was waived days later. I don't think that there's any messing around as it relates to what Jim Harbaugh wants to build for this team. So in this circumstance, I think if you're Easton Stick, you want to bury that first preseason performance, move on to game 2 as quickly as you can, but you do that with the circumstances of knowing that who knows what could happen over the next couple of weeks. I definitely would say that it's a warning. I'll go as far as to say that. Do I think that they would go as far outside of them signing a veteran quarterback? I don't think that you would probably move on from Easton Stick if you don't sign a veteran quarterback. I think that they would still, no pun intended, stick with him, considering who else is on the roster. But at the same time, you look at the moment that was just had after practice today with essentially a 4th string quarterback. I think that's all you need to know from the standpoint of how your performance was compared to QB4's performance. And I'd be interested to know going into this second preseason game how they're going to shuffle the reps between the 3 quarterbacks.
Yep. And again, you saw evidence of this team focusing on building this team from the bottom up. And you're seeing transactions after transactions after transactions just since the game. You're seeing Isaiah Wooden was brought in. I think today they announced they signed Savion Jackson, linebacker Shaq Quarterman. And some of this, I think, is because of the Chris Rumph injury, which sounds like it's a foot thing. The coaching staff said it's going to miss some time. But you saw Chris Wilcox waived, Ben Mason waived, the Praise Olato, I can't pronounce his name, but the speedster, who they, I think, signs like a 3-year contract, waived. Keith Bowman waived. Like, things are happening quick. And so it's kind of one of those, like, get on the train or hop off. And Jim Harbaugh talked about this again today when he was talking about, or yesterday, about, those who say marathon, not a sprint. Like, this is also a sprint. It's a marathon and a sprint. Jake, you and I both go to Chipotle. We love it. I'm always the and guy, right? They want chicken or steak or barbacoa. I want chicken, half barbacoa, and I want all the salsas. Like, that's how Harbaugh is, right? It's a marathon and a sprint. We need to be fundamentally sound, and we have to be able to make plays, and we have to be able to disrupt the football, and we have to tackle, and we have to be a bully and all of it, right? And that's what makes a competent franchise. Is you can't just be a one-trick pony. You can't just plan for the short term. You have to be able to be well-rounded. And Jorge says it best. This is what it's like to have a competent GM. And again, this is not a shot at Tom Telesco, but I don't recall this many fast and furious transactions after one preseason game. In 2 days.
This is what finding the best 53 is like, not staying competent. Who knows if any of these players that they even signed here in this most recent transaction are going to end up making the roster. But at the same time, we're not in the locker rooms, Dan. We're not at every single practice. We're not in the team positional meetings with the rest of these guys. This shows you what not only Jim Harbaugh, but potentially the rest of the position coaches are saying as well. So I love it from a team building standpoint. I don't take it as anything that's concerning. I actually say it's encouraging from the standpoint of, again, here's Joe Hortiz doing exactly what he said he was going to do in terms of building out the bottom of this roster. Competitors welcome, baby. Let's go to work. Let's see who comes to play.
They're building a bully, and I keep going back to that. Like, that's a mentality. You heard, you hear Greg Roman talking about like the medieval at times.
That was awesome.
Mindset.
Yes.
Like that we have not seen this Chargers team do that in like 20 years. Honestly, 15, 20 years. Okay, enough of the crap stuff. Like there was a lot of good that came from this game too. And
yeah, I'd like my dessert now, please.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
We talked about earlier the offense and the struggles it had. But there were some highlights on both sides of the football. And I know one of them, Jake, brought a smile to your face almost instantly when that game kicked off.
The
floor is yours, my friend. Take a bow. You called your shot and the shot went in.
I'm hoping that it continues. Tremon Morris-Brash, who I have been extremely high on since the Chargers brought him in as an undrafted free agent, just oozes the pass rushing ability that you want. His power to speed that basically put him on the map at UCF. And I was so happy that those things were starting to translate leading up to the first preseason game, because he was getting notoriety then. He obviously had his preseason game, which he stood out in a big, big way to start that game. Jesse Minter was talking about him leading up to that first preseason game. The practice right after the game, first practice that they had, he goes out and starts continuing to have that momentum. Dan, this is where the edge 5 to me is up for grabs. Essentially, if the Chargers keep an additional edge beyond their big 4, especially with this Chris Rumph injury, I think that Tremon Morris-Brash has a leg up on that position. And I loved what I saw from him. I loved what I saw from him in college. I'm hoping that continues to develop over the next couple of weeks. And I hope that he actually, especially on defense, because we have a lot to talk about as it relates to defense, you're going to figure out that defense is going to be a hell of a roster side to predict who's going to make the final 53. It's going to be tough when you have some of the guys that are standing out the way that they are standing out. And Tremon Morris-Brash, to me, who has been that, and I'm glad to see that those skill set of his is finally being notarized and now being, noticed and now bringing forth to the table on his first preseason game. Again, I hope it continues. So he's one that I've been rooting for since May, and I hope that he ends up making this 53-man roster.
Yeah, and it was, as soon as I saw that first play that he made, I was like, oh, incoming tweet from Jake. Incoming message from
Jake. I didn't even say anything. I mean,
he looked good, man. He looked good. He looks, again, I think what's important is he looks like he belongs, and that's what you're looking for here. If you belong or if you're standing out, that says something for the bottom of the roster players that are looking to get some playing time. Joe Alt, again, number 5 pick overall. And there's a lot of hype around Joe Alt and talk about the importance of the offensive line and questioning if he can go to the right side and what that's going to look like and all that jazz. Other than I think it was one that he got away with, or that when it got away from him from Chenowuosu, we all know very well.
Fitting.
He looked good, man. Like, he looked good. It didn't seem like the moment was too big for him. I thought his footwork was really good. Even when he slipped, there's one play where he slipped, but still like pushed the guy back and got the block done. If your right tackle looks like that in his first game as a rookie, I think they're doing just fine. And I know it's on the backdrop of who was available, and we don't need to rehash all that stuff, but think about the long term, what is best for this team and this franchise and this quarterback, and which way do you want to build? And they are building with protection in mind first and foremost. And Joe Alt looked like he was the guy who was arguably the best offensive lineman in the last 5-10 years.
Here's one of the things that I think we need to remember from Saturday's preseason game. When you look across the sidelines, number one, the Seattle Seahawks were playing a lot of their defensive starters that they had. Number two, new head coach Mike McDonald knows Jim Harbaugh pretty well because he coached underneath him in Michigan. And essentially, as when we've had Tyler McHugh on this show, set the foundation for the building blocks that Jesse Minter ended up putting into place at Michigan defensively. So I'm sure that he had somewhat of an idea in terms of what he wanted to install defensively over there in Seattle. And of course, he's probably very familiar with how Jim Harbaugh wanted to run his offense. Now, as you mentioned, not only probably one of the better offensive lineman performances that we've seen this early, but still just as maybe the best offensive player in general on Saturday as far as who performed well. And to have that against a mostly starting defensive unit for a rookie right tackle for a guy who's changing his position side, not bad. Not a bad start at all. So encouraging days for Joe Hall this early in preseason.
Yeah, and honestly, I think that the part that is tough is, as good as Joe Alt was, we talked about earlier, but the rest of the offensive line for the most part wasn't good. You mentioned Leatherwood, Jake. I don't think I've seen a number this low before, but 35 offensive snaps, 7.7 pass blocking grade. Like, I've never seen a single digit pass blocking grade before. Not good. Again, small sample size from some other guys, but you saw really bad offensive line play. Bucky Williams, right guard, 31.2. Brett Liang, 33.2 grade. Both those guys had 28 snaps. Brendan Hymas, 46.1. Not great. I'm curious to see what that happens with roster cuts and what they do at the center position behind Bradley Bozeman. Joe Alt was, I think he was second highest offensive lineman in terms of run blocking. Looked pretty good. Otherwise, there really wasn't much to go home about from the offensive line. And the unfortunate part of that was because of the line struggles and because of Easton Stick, you saw Hayden Hurst get absolutely blown up. We haven't heard much from that, and you could blame the offense. That might be the one time where maybe that wasn't the offensive line's fault, and that was just Easton Stick throwing a ball that shouldn't have been thrown, or in a spot that it shouldn't have been thrown to. But that's the difference of Justin Herbert to Easton Stick in one play. Decision-making, accuracy, that was bad. So we haven't heard anything about Hayden Hurst in terms of if he's okay. Again, that was a nasty looking shot. And I think he got up, he was on the bike, I think I saw afterwards. But you can't have that for a guy who's supposed to be impacting this team. Gets hurt like that. Standouts, Jake, moving on. We talked about the linebackers, and it was so cool for me to see, and that, how technical, so cool. But it was just refreshing for me to see a linebacker room that was getting utilized, and you're seeing linebackers making plays behind the line of scrimmage, and you're seeing them make impact plays. Troy Dye looked good. Nick Neiman looked good. We've all talked about like the potential of Deion Henley and Junior Colson, but what we're starting to see is like the coaching staff can do what they want with who they have and can make it work. You're seeing like JT Woods out there, like behind the line of scrimmage on nickel blitzes. You're seeing safeties play corner playing safety. There's like creativity. And again, this is a preseason game. I feel like the coach has practice and they're doing this stuff. And imagine what they're going to do when they have like the starters out there. But Troy Dye, I think you gave him a game ball today. Talk about just refreshing to see, and good for him, honestly. Look good.
Again, a position that has essentially struggled over the last couple of years for the Chargers. They've lost some of their biggest stars at that position. And especially if you go back last year and thinking about what the production was like between Eric Kendricks and Kenneth Murray. Again, I know we're talking about one preseason game here, but I'm more interested in seeing how the linebackers are being utilized in coverage, or how they're being utilized when shooting the gap, and how they're actually performing when doing so. So Troy Dye having literally 2 plays in one defensive series where ended up making a quarterback hurry, disrupted that pass, and then follows it up with a sack immediately after that. And Nick Niemann essentially had the exact same thing on the following defensive series. Disrupted a play and then came in with a sack right after that. It's encouraging from the standpoint that you have not only a defensive coordinator who's going to be calling plays like this, but he now knows, and we've talked about this plenty of times as it relates to Jesse Minter, knows the strengths and knows the ability of the guys that he's coaching to be confident enough to put them in a position to win. And for 2 players that are essentially brought in specifically for special teams, mind you, we're not talking about Deion Henley, Junior Colson, or Denzel Perryman here. We're talking about the other 2 linebackers that essentially round out the depth of your linebacking unit and that are mainly special team standouts.
That is depth. When is the last time that we saw backup linebackers make impactful plays consistently in a football game? I'll wait. I can't even remember the last time I saw that.
Tip your hat to Jesse Minter for it, because maybe he gave a little bit, I don't want to say too much away, but maybe earlier than you would expect for a first preseason game defensively. But damn it, if that was a taste test, just give me the whole damn drink right now. Get me to week 1.
Yeah.
I don't want to wait anymore.
Yeah, here's a comment. Henley looked like Drew with more juice, who suddenly have depth at a position that has been neglected by Staley. That's without talking about Puna, Scott, Tito, and Fox. Again, Staley drafted Dan Henley. So, remember that. So I wouldn't, but linebacking play, world's different. And again, I give credit to Jesse Minter. I think Navarro Bowman has had a huge impact on this team. You heard Dan Henley talk about that at the press conference the other day about the importance and the benefit of having a player's coach, but a player's coach who's played and has done everything that they are asking this linebacking core to do, has been through all of it and has done it at a Pro Bowl Hall of Fame caliber clip. That matters to these players. And to see a linebacking core do this, and you mentioned Dan Henley, he belongs, dude. I'm so excited to see him alongside Junior Colson and Denzel Perryman. And Junior Colson today now, first day, Jake, by the way, sound the alarms. Junior Colson in 7-on-7s. He's been on the sideline doing individual workouts, recovering from the appendicitis. We're getting close. And Dan Henley, go back to Washington State, and he talked about it. So many people talk about him and his coverage abilities. That he does that well, but he also is going to get after the quarterback too and runs downhill with authority and is physical. He has the multi-position background. This linebacking core is versatile and it kind of had that hybrid feel, but they are athletic, dude. And it was really, really, really refreshing to see that group perform. And honestly, I thought this was interesting for me too, Jake. Just thinking about the defense as a whole, there's a bunch of standouts with guys that you were like, oh, this is important to the success of this team. It wasn't just the bottom 5 of the 90-man roster who are not getting a clip. AJ Finley, we'll talk about here. He has safety 3 by the horns. You saw Tony Jefferson come in at the very end, but dude, he made impactful plays when it mattered. JT Woods, there was some plays where he was looking real good, but that's kind of the MO is there's glimpses of things. And then there's stuff you're just you gotta finish that. But let's stay with AJ Finley for a second.
Yeah, essentially AJ Finley is as advertised as what has been talked about for him over the past several weeks of training camp, that he has the third safety position on lock right now. And when you just think about that training camp battle, that's been strictly between really him and JT Woods. Dan, I don't think it's even close right now. And yes, to your point, I thought that there was performances from JT Woods during that first preseason game that I thought to myself, that's some of the best flashes I've seen from him since he's been on this team, even in the small scope in which he has played. But
it was back-to-back plays, I think. Yeah.
The inconsistencies are still there. Even Dean Leonard had a couple of inconsistencies, had some good flashes, then also had some, got to finish that. But AJ Finley, again, you talk about another guy, undrafted free agent, who essentially has just built himself on this roster since late last year and has now come in this season. And again, we're talking about safety 3. We're not talking about Derwin James or Alohi Gilman. We're talking about a key piece behind a position that has needed depth severely for a number of years. And now you're talking about a guy who can come in and perform like this, is only going to give more flexibility to what this defense can do with Derwin James. It's going to benefit them tremendously in that circumstance. The reports were not lying. And Dan, we've even seen it ourselves as far as what AJ Finley had been doing out there on the field. And now when you put it, again, we've already gotten flashes to what he's been able to contribute on a team in a different defense. Obviously, in the losing season, there wasn't much to talk about at that point in time. But to start it off like this, when you really need to have that safety 3 competition and to who's going to say who's going to win it, this may have been one of the earliest column races that you could think of, because he's essentially had it since the beginning of training camp, and I don't think that he's letting it go.
Yeah, and does it mean that Tony Jefferson is not going to be on this team? No. It does not mean that. But what we did see was this Chargers team is going to rotate a crap ton of players in and out of this lineup, especially on the secondary. And hell, you could say that for the linebackers, probably less of linebackers, but the defensive line and the cornerback position, surely, or DB position. It's important in this defense to have multiple guys who can do multiple things. And you saw Steve Clinkscale and you see Jesse Minter all talk about versatility and the importance of it, and guys being able to play multiple positions, safety playing corner, outside corner, slot corner, tackling, coverage, ball skills, all of that. You're seeing why. You're seeing corners playing safety. You're seeing safeties and corners blitzing. You're seeing linebackers blitzing and back in coverage. You're seeing defensive, like all of that. But you're seeing good performances by a bunch of guys. I thought Tito looked good. Nick Neiman looked really good. Morgan Fox and flashes, I thought looked pretty good. We didn't talk about Christian Fulton yet. Christian Fulton played a little bit.
Looked good.
Great round the clip. And this is on the back of Christian Fulton having like back-to-back balling days at practice in a camp. I'm not going to sit there and say that I am satisfied with the cornerback room yet. But if the players and coaching staff can look this good come regular season, I will gladly say that I was too pessimistic. But the new look defense, it's as advertised. And I think there's something to be said about a coach that's brought in that was great at his craft, at what he did, and able to focus on just doing that. And the part of Jesse Minter that I love is it's not just that he's a smart dude. It's that he can say things in 16 different ways to 16 different audiences to make sure that whatever it is that needs to get done, he can speak it and they can hear it, because those are two different things. And the teacher, the stacking bricks, the adaptability, the creativity, and the brains, all of that is what makes this new look defense exciting. And again, it was one preseason game, but like, I don't remember a defense having that much like sizzle in terms of opportunities that present themselves for defenders. Now, there were a bunch of plays they left out there. That there were some interceptions that were left out there. But you saw like PBUs, you saw folks batting balls line of scrimmage, you saw defensive linemen put their hands up, corners batting balls down. Where has this been? So that's the stuff that I'm like, oh, yes, give me more of that. If that's the dessert, like I want the main entree to be that, please.
Dan, the I'm glad that I was waiting for you to actually bring up the 2 plays that really got to me. That was the 3rd and 15 and the 3rd and 17 conversions, which I'm sure brought bad flashbacks to everybody for that little moment. But at the same time, again, like we had talked about, don't expect it to be flawless in the preseason. You're still tightening the screws on some stuff. But for a first preseason game, very encouraging stuff. I'm glad you brought up Tito because he had one play that was just unfortunate from the standpoint that I believe that ended up being a running play by Seattle that it just ended up going away from him. But he actually just pancaked his guy almost back to the quarterback.
Yeah,
it's just unfortunate that it was a running play because it really could have been a disruptive pass. It's funny. We've gone 46 minutes here and we haven't even talked about Thule, but really there isn't much to bring up about Thule because Thule is just Thule.
Thule is the fact that his face mask got clear, almost ripped off, and he still almost got there and didn't get called.
Should have been a penalty for that. And yes, to his credit, should he have finished the play? Yes, he should. But Thule is just being Thule and essentially just looks like it's the middle of last season that he's displaying out there on the field. So defensively, a lot to take away. I'm excited to see what this is going to build up over the next 3 weeks.
We've also made it 46 minutes, and we haven't talked about the 58-yard field goal with ease.
Good Lord.
And, I mean, we talked about it. I personally did not see Cameron Dicker miss once in any practice that I've been to. Now, he has missed. He's missed in practices since. But that guy is so good. And the one thing that people have talked about is like the one, I don't know, knock is, does he have a big enough leg that he's so accurate, but when you take him out of 50, like, I don't know, do you trust? That looked pretty dang good. And it's nice to have a weapon at the kicking position. And Cameron Dicker he's nails, man. Like, he is so good. It was great to see that 58-yarder.
I mean, the broadcast said it all. When you have the announcers comparing the accuracy stats to Justin Tucker from the previous season, yes, did Cameron Dicker have technically, a little bit less opportunity considering the offense that he was working with last year? Yes, but from the standpoint of just overall accuracy, and in terms of your efficiency and kicks you're making, when your efficiency is in the 90s, that's ridiculous. And it's being noticed, which I love. And I loved the sideline report right after Cameron Dicker drills the field goal to where they're saying Cameron Dicker doesn't even look at the post. He aims for the big sign that says SoFi Stadium right behind it, and he aims for the letters in the middle. And that's his barometer on where he's going to place his kick. How can you just not be impressed with this? I myself almost got drilled by one of his kicks, more so due to my own incompetence and where I was standing on the field. Probably not
during camp.
Probably not Cameron Dicker necessarily aiming for me, but still, it was going through the net and it was good. Either way, whether I got nailed or not. I think he's only missed one kick, Dan, since camp got underway. There was one day, I can't remember if it was last week or earlier this week, to where he was 9 of 10. And that was the first field goal that he essentially had missed. But he has been nails. And when you're drilling a 58-yarder when his previous career high was 55, even in a preseason game, screw it. This kid is oozing confidence right now. I love it.
58 yards is 58 yards, no matter when it is, where it is. Like, that's, I liked it. A good insight here. Scott Child says, Howell broke for a scramble on 3rd and long early in the game. Later in the game, Minter called a QB spy on a sack on a 3rd and 10, adjustments on the fly. That's one of Jesse Minter's calling cards, is his adjustments first half to second half. And we've talked to a lot of folks who are familiar with Jesse Minter's defense at Michigan specifically, and how much better it gets as the game goes on. That's what's fun about this is the adjustments, so to speak. Sweet Jump says, Dicker with a draw. Yeah, that looked good, man. At first I was like, oh, yep. Okay, we're good. All pro season loading here. Otto says 58 at sea level. Imagine what then in Denver. I wonder what that'd be. That's like 65. I mean, it was probably back good maybe from another 65. I mean, that one currently, that one that he hit, if that was 65 yards, I think that may have squeaked in.
I think if you're in Denver, you get a shot at 65. Possibly.
I'm just saying that kick, go back and look at the replay. That kick cleared that crossbar by a bit. You're in the 60s for sure.
He's got power.
Whatever.
There's no doubt about that. I think he's put those worries to bed.
Yep. Yeah. All right. We got about 10 minutes left here on the live show. Appreciate everybody for tuning in. This is fun. We always love doing these. If you have any questions or comments, things you want us to bring up here, we'll kind of try to go rapid fire as we kind of round this one out. I guess, were there any major surprises from that game that maybe we haven't talked about yet? Or just like the biggest thing that you're like, wow, wasn't expecting that? For me, it was the linebackers. It was to seeing the impact of the linebacker position. That was the one where I was like, oh, okay.
I think you can talk about the run game a little bit, not necessarily just, I think because you obviously couldn't really get the run game going. And that in turn was another aspect of the offense that just underperformed. But more so, you start talking about how is this going to affect the overall position? Because we've been talking about the running back battle now as it relates to the stable that we believe is going to be running back by committee. Isaiah Spiller, I didn't feel that he got a chance to show much. Jared Patterson, who was taking kickoffs, who when we had ESPN Chris Rim on the show the week prior, he had talked about Jared Patterson being a standout in practices leading up to this game. And then you see him being essentially the starter and taking a good chunk of those running snaps.
He did okay, honestly, Jake. Seven carries, 38 yards, 5.4 average.
I don't want to put the splash the water on the people who are high on Kamani Vidal, which I definitely am, but Daniel Popper's recent 53-man projection had Kamani Vidal not making the final roster. He had Jarrett Patterson's taking his roster spot. Now, again, he 100% said that this was pure speculation and just based off of what he's seeing and that things can totally change within the next 2 weeks of games. He had it J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, Jared Patterson, and Isaiah Spiller as the four.
He had Spiller over Vidal. Interesting.
And this is the difference, Dan. Well, it's not necessarily the difference, but it's both of those guys have contributed on special teams. Kamani Vidal also, we've seen in training camp, has some special teams appeal. I think that he has more juice than both of those other guys, but it was a weird thing, Dan, because it was the same thing happened with him and Ladd McConkey leading up to the game. Remember, everybody was
dressed.
Ladd was in pads, Kamani was in pads, and then all of a sudden they go back to the locker room and they come back there in street clothes. I'm not sure if it was one of those type of situations to where they were on the fringe of being able to go, and then maybe through pregame warmups, they decided, you know what, let's err on the side of caution. We'll just keep you out this week, and hopefully we'll get a chance to see them both practice or play this upcoming week because they've both been out for an extended period of time. But that's another one to keep your eye on, Dan, in terms of when we get down to these 53-man roster and ultimately making the decision. You have 2 more preseason games as well as the practices in between to make the roster. And so far, we know what injury does to players in those situations, and hopefully that doesn't end up derailing the Kamani Vidal train.
Yeah, I don't think it will. Again, like he hasn't really been able to showcase much in a game. And I think games is kind of where running backs can make or break their roster spots, especially if they're on the bubble. Okay, let's go through a couple rapid fire here. Jake, let's kind of go short and sweet. What are your thoughts on the surge? This is from James Wagner. What are your thoughts on the surge of new players signed the past couple of days, particularly linebackers? I think I said this a little bit earlier. I think it's twofold. 1, competitors welcome and always looking for ways to improve their team. 2, I think the Chris Rumpf injury is impacting some of the stuff, especially the outside linebacker stuff. Those are the biggest reasons I think they're doing it. And again, they're looking at what this team needs given holes due to injury or given holes due to talent. And that's what they're focusing on. And then they're also, I think, cutting dead weight of the guys that they don't think is going to fit with this team. And they're finding the best available person to replace them regardless of position.
I would agree.
Let's see. Quentin Johnson expectations, asks Vinny.
Well, the quarterback play on Saturday didn't help Quentin Johnston or do him any favors.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I think that this team needs a quarterback to throw it to receivers so we can get a gauge on how good the receivers are doing. Otherwise, all we're able to do is check if the receiver is able to get open. And we could say Brendan Rice did it. Simi Fehoko, I think, had a pretty decent game overall. Quentin Johnston was out there, running routes and stuff, but like there were a grand total of 14 passes completed for $121.
They actually completed that many passes?
Total 14 for an average of 4.2 yards.
I thought it was less, considering how long it took them just to get their first down of the game. I thought it was less.
Yeah.
Wow.
Honestly, I did too, actually. Let's see. Next one. From the practices that you attended, did camp look more physical than usual, or is tempo more intense than before? Also, great to know that the team is overly cautious of injuries. Yes.
Yes. Emphatically yes. Now, Dan, in the one practice that Dan and I attended together, we were both on opposite side of the fields. Dan got a better shot at the wide receivers on his side of the field, especially when they were running 11-on-11 drills in terms of the plays that were being made down there. I was closer to the defensive line and the offensive line, and I could tell you from our conversations that we've had from both, we've never seen a practice operate like that. And I say that from the standpoint, again, when you go to practice, you notice that there's no music playing. And I think that that's another reason why we're able to discern this, because you're able to hear the coaches talking to the players as far as what it is they want to do. There was so much praise that I got to hear for Zion Johnson from Mike Devlin, from Nick Hardwick, and in terms of what they wanted them to do. For Jordan McFadden, what they wanted him to do that day. It is tempo. There is a different aura that takes place during Chargers practices right now. And it just feels different. It really just feels different. It feels like everybody is out there having fun, which not to say that traditionally they didn't have fun, but in terms of operation, overall, how practices are conducted, how they are evaluated, creativity, hell, Jordan McFadden going in motion, damn, like that woke me up. And it's on both sides of the ball, and you can just feel it, especially when you're just watching each one of the positional groups when they're broken up before they even get into 11-on-11 drills. It's completely different, and you love to see it.
Yeah. So to answer the question, is it more physical? I think there's more attention to physicality, 100%. Yeah. You're seeing so much more emphasis on whether it's goal line situations, on like the beefed up times of games and the importance of those goal line situations. There's a lot more focus on the trenches and attention to detail, both on individual drills as well as when you get to 11-on-11. That's there. Tempo, specifics. I've never seen this, but when they go through tempo of like no huddle situations or 2-minute drills, they're doing that regardless of if the pass is complete or not, regardless if the guy's in and out of bounds. It doesn't matter. They are flying to the next play for both offensive defense to have to be on the ball at all times. And they are cruising. And it's kind of chaotic from the outside looking in, because you're hearing, again, no music. So you're hearing both sides screaming, both sides wondering like, okay, we've got to get this in, got this guy in, got to substitute, got to get in field goal, but whatever. They're getting in more plays per day, guarantee, than they have in the past. And I think it's important and it's effective to kind of embrace the chaos, because like that's what a real game is like, right? Like it's insane. There's everybody kind of getting in and out. You're trying to substitute, trying to make play call adjustments, all the protection, you name it, all with the clock running down, with the noise going on. Like, I think it's important to have that so you can be calm into those circumstances. And then lastly, I think the overly cautious of injuries. Yes. Emphatically, yes. This team, the staff, you're kind of starting to get a glimpse of Jim Harbaugh and his Harbaugh-isms, or things he says that mean one thing versus another. There's like going through something and what that means versus going to miss some time, i.e. Chris Rumpf, and the abundance of caution, moniker that we all heard. That's all by design, and that's all intentional. We've heard that. That's been a thing from Ben Herbert and Jim Harbaugh back in Michigan too. Yeah, for sure. The practice is different. Even communication, that's a big one for me too. They're doing stuff with signs that I see like in college all the time, and they're helping kind of get the players' mindset correct about the things that are most important visually, audibly, and being able to kind of deduce that information quickly and efficiently. It's just a different clip. And yeah, it's just a tight ship that's being run. They're having fun, but it's a business out there. Like you're seeing things go in an important way. And I think that's why Jim Harbaugh was paid all the money he was. And that's why he's here and why everybody followed him, to be honest. Anything else, Jake? I know we went through a bunch here. We talked about Fehoko. I'm trying to go through questions, make sure I got all of them. I go into the Rams game, possibly. Was Vidal out there during the game? Nope. I think got all of them. Jake, any last words, parting words for folks who've tuned in?
I think there's a nice parting tease that we can give people for tomorrow's special episode. Let me just say you won't want to miss it. Let me just say make sure you tune in. Make sure when the episode drops tomorrow morning that you watch, because I promise you'll be happy.
It's a good one. It's a good one. A lot of fun times ahead. Chargers play a football game again. They're playing the Rams this weekend. We have an episode coming out tomorrow as well with some perspective on a thing or two about this team. I'm excited about it. Chargers fans will love it, I hope. But until then, Jake, this has been fun. Next game can't come soon enough, says Sweet Jumps. I completely agree. Awesome. Thanks for the answer. Got me hyped. I think that was in response to training camp. We'll see as things progress, but this is the new era. And we finally got our first glimpse of that. Week 1 in the books, week 2 preseason ahead against the Rams. We shall see how that goes. But until then, guys, gals, thank you so much for tuning in. If you haven't done so already, please hit the like and subscribe. Helps us out a ton. Leave a comment. Let us know how you're doing. We're open to feedback. Competitors welcome. Feedback welcome. All of that. You can find Jake at Jake D. Hefner. For Jake, I'm Dan. Chargers Unleashed. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Take care. We'll talk to you soon on the next Chargers Unleashed.